You open the app without thinking. A few seconds in, you're already watching someone else's life. Their apartment, their body, their career, their relationship. And before you've even put the phone down, something has already shifted inside you. A quiet dissatisfaction that wasn't there a moment ago. You didn't choose to feel it. You didn't invite it in, but there it is. And here's what nobody tells you. That feeling isn't a flaw. It isn't weakness. It isn't some modern epidemic caused by social media or capitalism or the culture you grew up in. That feeling is ancient. It's been running inside human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. And the reason you can't stop comparing yourself to others has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with what you are. You are a social primate. And for most of your species' existence, knowing where you stood relative to everyone around you was the difference between surviving and not. Go back 200,000 years. Your ancestors lived in small bands, 30, maybe 50 people at most. Every single one of those people mattered. Who was the strongest? Who was the best hunter? Who had the most allies? Who the group trusted in a crisis? These were not abstract social questions. They were survival calculations. Because in a world without hospitals, without stored food, without any of the systems that insulate you from death today, your position in the group determined whether you ate, whether you were protected, whether you mated, whether your children lived. Psychologist Leon Festinger identified this drive in 1954 and named it social comparison theory. His argument was simple. Human beings have an innate need to evaluate their own opinions and abilities. And when objective measurements aren't available, when there's no scoreboard, no ruler, no clear answer, they look sideways. They look at the person next to them. They use other people as the measuring stick. Festinger didn't think this was a problem. He thought it was a tool, a way of calibrating yourself, of figuring out where you actually stand so you can make better decisions about what to do next. The brain doesn't label this process comparison. It doesn't announce it. It just does it. Continuously, automatically, below the level of your conscious awareness. Neuroscientists have found that the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain most associated with how you think about yourself, becomes significantly more active the moment you're given information about how you rank relative to others. Not when you're thinking about your own traits in isolation. When you see where you sit on the ladder, your brain is always, on some level, building a map of your social position and updating it in real time. Now understand what happens when that ancient system meets a world it was never built for. For most of human history, your comparison group was roughly 50 people. That was it. You might have occasionally encountered another band, seen strangers at a gathering, heard stories about a legendary hunter 3 valleys over. But your daily reference point, the people your brain was continuously measuring you against, was small, local, and real. People you could touch, people who also struggled, people whose failures and fears and bad days you witnessed alongside their good ones. Today, your comparison group is 4 billion people. The moment you open any screen, you are flooded with a curated highlight reel of the most photogenic, most successful, most articulate, most aesthetically composed moments from an effectively infinite pool of human lives. And your brain, running on hardware designed for a band of 50, treats every single one of those images as if it were a direct peer comparison. It doesn't know the difference. It never learned to make that distinction, because the distinction never needed to exist before. Psychologist Sherry Turkle at MIT has spent decades studying how technology reshapes human identity and connection. Her research shows that the more time people spend in digitally mediated social environments, the more they experience a phenomenon she describes as always on display. A state of continuous social performance and continuous social monitoring. Not because people choose to perform, because the brain interprets any social environment as one that requires a status read. So you scroll, and you read, and your brain quietly runs its ancient calculation, and the math keeps coming back wrong. Because the sample is poisoned, because no one posts their worst days with the same frequency they post their best ones, because the algorithm surfaces the peaks, not the valleys, and your ancient comparison system has no way to correct for that. It just takes the data and runs the numbers. Here's where it gets more specific. Researchers distinguish between two kinds of social comparison: upward comparison, measuring yourself against someone who appears to have more, do more, be more, and downward comparison, measuring yourself against someone who appears to have less. Your brain uses both, but it doesn't use them equally. In low-stakes environments, upward comparison can actually be motivating. You see someone performing at a level above yours, and something in you reaches toward it. This is how admiration works. This is how mentorship works. Your ancient brain, recognizing a skilled member of the band, leans in to learn. But in high-frequency, high-volume, low-context environments, like a social media feed, upward comparison becomes almost exclusively threatening. Because there's no relationship. There's no shared struggle. There's no evidence that the person on the screen is also sometimes confused, also sometimes scared, also sometimes eating cereal for dinner because they don't have the energy to cook. There's just the image. And your brain interprets the image as a peer, as someone in your band who is doing better than you. And it responds accordingly. Researcher Sonia Lyubomirsky at UC Riverside has spent years studying the relationship between social comparison and happiness. Her findings are blunt. People who habitually compare themselves to others, particularly in upward directions, report significantly lower levels of life satisfaction, higher rates of envy, and greater susceptibility to depression and anxiety. The comparison itself doesn't just feel bad in the moment, it reshapes how you interpret your own life over time. You stop seeing what you have and start seeing only what you don't. And this is the part that almost nobody explains clearly. The comparing doesn't hurt you because it reveals something true. It hurts you because it reveals something false. Because the data is incomplete. Because a life is not a photograph. Because a career is not a caption. Because a body is not a filter. Your brain receives a signal and responds as if the signal were reality. And the signal is not reality. But here's the harder truth underneath that. Even if you knew all of that, even if you genuinely understood it, intellectually, completely, you would still feel it. Because the mechanism isn't located in your rational mind, it's located much deeper, in circuits that predate language, in systems that don't consult your prefrontal cortex before they fire. Understanding why you compare doesn't switch the comparison off. It just gives you a frame to hold it in. Evolutionary psychologist David Buss at the University of Texas has argued that the emotions most closely associated with social comparison, envy, shame, pride, status anxiety, are not errors in the human emotional system. They are features. They evolved precisely because they were useful. Envy motivates pursuit. Shame enforces group norms. Pride signals achievement to the group. Status anxiety keeps you paying attention to where you stand, so you don't slip without noticing. These are not emotions you were handed by a broken culture. These are emotions that were handed down across hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary pressure. They are in you because the beings who had them survived more reliably than the beings who didn't. That does not mean they serve you well in the world you actually live in. It means they were built for a different world, and they're running in this one anyway. So what do you do with that? You start by understanding that the comparison is not the problem. The problem is the data you're feeding it. Your brain's comparison system is not malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. But it was built to operate on real information, the full, messy, embodied reality of a small group of people you actually knew. Not a feed, not a highlight reel, not 4 billion curated moments designed to perform excellence back at you. When you restrict the data, when you spend more time in the physical company of people whose full lives you witness, whose failures and recoveries and ordinary days you're present for, the comparison recalibrates. It doesn't disappear, but it roots itself in reality again. And reality is a much more forgiving place to measure yourself against. You also begin to notice the moment of comparison as it happens. Not to stop it, not to shame yourself for doing it, just to name it. Your brain is running an ancient calculation. It's doing what it always does. And the number it comes up with is based on incomplete data. You don't have to believe the result just because the calculation ran. There's a moment, most evenings, when you pick up your phone without thinking. You open an app, And before you've even registered what you're doing, the comparison engine is already running, already measuring, already deciding where you stand. That moment, the one that happens before you even know it's happening, that is the oldest thing about you. And now you know what it is.